Welcome back, everyone, to a new story. We really hope you enjoy it.
Do you really think you're still Roland? Dr. Aris asked, his voice cutting through the sterile room. A 3-month coma and a catastrophic medical error had completely rewritten my biology, giving me the body of a woman. This is the story of how I lost myself, only to finally awaken. The beeping of the heart monitor was the first thing that anchored me to reality. It was a rhythmic, obnoxious sound that drilled into my skull. Before I even had the strength to open my eyes, my eyelids felt like they were glued shut, heavy with the crust of what I assumed was a very long sleep. When I finally managed to pry them open, the harsh, unforgiving fluorescent lights of the intensive care unit blinded me. I tried to swallow, but my throat was a desert. I tried to speak, but only a pathetic, raspy squeak managed to escape. My brain was shrouded in a thick, impenetrable fog. The last thing I remembered was the screeching of tires, the smell of burning rubber, and the blinding headlights of a truck swerving into my lane. I had braced for an impact that shattered my world into darkness. "You're awake." I slowly turned my head, my neck muscles protesting with a dull ache. A man in a pristine white coat stood at the foot of my bed, holding a tablet. He didn't look relieved. If anything, he looked pale, his expression a grim mask of professional terror and deep, apologetic pity. I would soon learn his name was Dr. Aris. He didn't start with, "You're lucky to be alive," or "You've been in a coma for 3 months. He didn't offer a comforting smile. Instead, he stared at me, his eyes darting downward for a fraction of a second, before meeting mine again, and delivered the line that would sever my past from my present forever. "Do you really think you're still Roland?" I just stared at him. The question made absolutely zero sense. Of course I was Roland. I was a 22-year-old guy. I liked video games. I hated my accounting classes. And I was just trying to drive home from a late-night study session. Who else would I be? I furrowed my brow, attempting to voice my confusion, but again, only a dry wheeze left my lips. Dr. Aris pulled a chair up to the side of my bed and sat down heavily. He looked like a man about to deliver a death sentence. In a way, he was. "Roland, there was an error," he began, his voice shaking slightly, before he forced it into a steady clinical cadence. "A severe, catastrophic error in our electronic medical record system. While you were in your coma, your chart was merged with another patient on this floor, a patient who was undergoing aggressive, high-dose hormone replacement therapy." I blinked slowly, my drug-addled brain struggling to process the words. "Hormone replacement therapy. For 90 days. You were intravenously administered massive, continuous doses of estrogen and anti-androgens," he continued, his words falling like lead weights onto my chest. "But that isn't the entire story. The hormones alone shouldn't have caused this level of physical restructuring in such a short window. We ran genetic panels when we finally caught the mistake. Roland, you have an undiagnosed condition, complete androgen insensitivity syndrome. You were born with XY chromosomes, but your body's entirely blind to testosterone. It's an intersex condition. You've had an underlying dormant female biology your entire life. When the estrogen hit your system, it didn't just alter you, it unlocked you. Your body absorbed it like a sponge." I wanted to laugh. It had to be a joke. Some sick, twisted nightmare, induced by the trauma of the crash. But then I took a deep breath. As my lungs expanded, a totally alien sensation washed over me. There was a weight on my chest, a literal, physical heaviness that had never been there before. When my chest rose, the rough, starchy fabric of the hospital gown scraped across my skin. A sharp electric jolt of hypersensitivity shot through my nipples, making me gasp aloud. It wasn't just a slight soreness. It was an agonizingly tender, acute sensitivity that made me instantly arch my back into the mattress. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. Trembling, I slowly raised my hands. My arms felt weaker, the muscles I used to have completely hollowed out. I brought my palms to my chest, dreading what I was about to find. Softness. My hands met a plush, yielding pair of mounds resting heavily against my ribcage. They weren't just swollen tissue. They were full, undeniably female breasts. They filled my small hands perfectly, I squeezed them lightly, and another wave of intense, sensitive ache radiated through my chest.
The hospital gown was tenting over them, the fabric falling
into the newly formed valley between them. "Oh my God," I whispered, my voice finally breaking through. But even my voice sounded different. The resonance was gone. It sounded lighter, softer, stripped of its old masculine depth. Panic, cold and absolute, gripped my throat. I threw the thin hospital blanket off my legs, desperate to get up, desperate to run to a mirror and prove this doctor wrong. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed. The moment my feet hit the cold linoleum floor and I tried to stand, the world tilted. I pitched forward, crying out as my knees buckled. Dr. Aris lunged forward to catch me, but I grabbed the cold metal railing
of the bed to steady myself. My center of gravity was entirely wrong.
It felt as though someone had attached weights to my lower half. I looked down at my waist. The hospital gown hung loosely off my shoulders, but it clung to a pair of hips that flared out dramatically. My pelvis had widened, subtly but unmistakably, shifting the entire biomechanics of my body. But that wasn't the most shocking part. As I stood there, gripping the rail, I felt my thighs pressing together. There was no gap anymore. The lean, bony legs I remembered were gone, replaced by thick, plush thighs that rubbed against each other with every micro-movement I made. The skin was incredibly soft, the layer of body fat having completely redistributed itself during my 90-day slumber.
My skin felt absurdly thin, lacking the coarse texture I was used to.
It was smooth, almost fragile. "Don't try to walk yet," Dr. Aris urged, hovering near me with his hands outstretched.
"Your musculoskeletal system has undergone a rapid shift. Your center of mass is lower. Your ligaments have loosened due to the estrogen."
I ignored him. I had to see. The small ensuite bathroom was only 5 steps away, but walking there felt like learning to pilot a completely unfamiliar machine. I waddled awkwardly, my hips swaying out of necessity, because my femurs were now angled differently from my widened pelvis. The friction of my soft inner thighs brushing against each other sent bizarre, unfamiliar sensory feedback to my brain. I reached the bathroom and gripped the edges of the sink, slowly raising my eyes to the mirror. A stranger stared back at me. My hair had grown out over the 3 months, falling in a messy, raven black cascade past my shoulders. But it was the face that made me stop breathing. The sharp angles of my jawline were gone, softened by a new layer of subcutaneous fat. My cheeks were fuller. My lips looked poutier and flushed. Without the heavy brow ridge I used to have, my blue eyes looked massive, dew-like, and terrified. My skin was practically glowing, stripped of any rough pores or stubble. With a shaking hand, I untied the small string at the back of my hospital gown and let it slide off my shoulders. It pulled around my feet, leaving me completely exposed to the harsh bathroom lighting. I let out a broken, silent sob. The reflection was devastatingly feminine. My shoulders had narrowed, the muscle mass eaten away by atrophy and a total lack of testosterone. My waist dipped inward sharply, exaggerating the wide, generous curve of my new hips. My breasts sat high and full on my chest, the pink areolas larger and far more sensitive than I could have ever imagined. The hair on my body was practically non-existent, leaving behind a smooth, flawless canvas of pale skin. I was a woman, from the neck down, from the hips out. I was physically, undeniably female. I slumped against the sink, my newly softened knees threatening to give out again. My mind was screaming. I wanted to smash the mirror. I wanted to sue the hospital until they didn't have a dime left. I wanted to wake up from this grotesque nightmare and go back to my boring, ordinary life as Roland. But as I stood there, shivering in the cold air, something deeply unsettling began to happen. I looked down at my hands. My fingers were slender, the nails clean and delicate. I trailed one hand up my stomach, feeling the soft curve of my waist, up to the agonizingly tender flesh of my breast. It didn't feel wrong. That was the most terrifying part of all. Beneath the surface layer of my screaming, masculine panic, there was a quiet, insidious stillness. My brain wasn't rejecting the body. It was mapping to it perfectly, the way my hips swayed. When I shifted my weight, The way my chest felt full and present, it felt biologically correct. It was as if my mind had been wearing a heavy, ill-fitting coat for 22 years, and someone had finally taken it off. I closed my eyes and let my head fall forward, resting my forehead against the cool glass of the mirror. A single tear slipped down my cheek, hot and fast. I was mourning the death of the boy I used to be, even as I felt the undeniable, terrifying pulse of the woman who had just woken up. "Roland," Dr. Aris called out softly from the hospital room. I opened my eyes, looking at the beautiful, terrified girl in the mirror. I didn't know who she was yet, but deep down, in a place I was too afraid to admit existed, I knew she wasn't Roland. The ride home from the hospital was a blur of motion sickness and silent terror. For 3 months, the world had moved on without me, and I was returning to it as an imposter in my own life. Every bump in the road sent a jolt of tender, agonizing awareness through my chest. I had to cross my arms defensively, holding them tightly against my ribs, just to keep my heavy, newly formed breasts from bouncing painfully beneath the oversized hospital sweatshirt they had discharged me in. When my mom pulled into our driveway, she quickly parked and rushed to the passenger side to help me out. I didn't want to need her help, but my body betrayed me. Getting out of a low car seat with wide, unfamiliar hips and a shifted center of gravity was a clumsy ordeal. My thick thighs rubbed together frictionally beneath the thin gray sweatpants, a constant, unavoidable reminder of my mutated biology. Walking through the front door of my childhood home felt like stepping into a museum dedicated to a dead boy. "Take it slow, honey," my mom whispered, her hand gently supporting the small of my back. She had aged 5 years in the 3 months I was asleep. Her eyes carried the heavy exhaustion of endless doctor consultations, legal battles with the hospital, and intensive psychological counseling. She knew the truth long before I woke up. She had watched my body morph day by day, helpless to stop. The estrogen from rewriting her son into a daughter. I nodded, gripping the banister as I slowly made my way up the stairs. My breathing was shallow. I just wanted to get to my room, close the door, and hide under the heavy blankets until this nightmare ended. I pushed open my bedroom door and stopped dead in my tracks. The room was exactly as I had left it on the night of the crash. My gaming PC was sitting dormant on the desk. My posters of indie bands and vintage cars still lined the walls. It was Roland's room. But as I took a few steps inside, my eyes drifted to the closet, and the illusion of my old life shattered completely. The closet doors were wide open. My dark, baggy jeans, my oversized graphic tees, my heavy flannel shirts, they were all gone. The hangers had been entirely replaced. "Mom," I rasped, my voice soft and tremulous, "where are my clothes?" She stepped into the room behind me, closing the door softly, with a click that sounded like a lock tumbling into place. She walked over to the bed and sat down, patting the mattress for me to join her. I waddled over, my hips swaying awkwardly, and sat beside her. "The doctors and the therapists, we talked a lot while you were under," she began, her voice remarkably steady, though I could see her hands trembling in her lap. "They explained the physical changes, the hypersensitivity of your skin, the structural shifts in your pelvis and chest. I tried. Sweetheart, I tried putting your old clothes on you when the nurses were bathing you." She swallowed hard, looking at my chest. "Your old shirts chafed you so badly. Your skin would blister. The rough denim of your jeans dug into your new hips and left bruises. You can't wear them anymore. Your body, it physically rejects male clothing now." I stared at the closet, hanging neatly in a row. Were basic, soft, pastel-colored garments, nothing overly flashy, just practical. Everyday women's clothing, soft knit sweaters, wide-leg linen pants, high-waisted leggings, and simple t-shirts. "I bought you some things," she continued gently. "Just basics, things that will be gentle on your skin, while you heal and get used to everything." She reached over to a small shopping bag resting on my nightstand. From it, she pulled out 2 tiny, terrifying items. One was a pale gray, seamless sports bra, free of underwire, but thick enough to offer real support. The other was a pair of simple, white cotton bikini panties. "You need to wear these," she said,
holding them out to me. Your chest needs support, or the connective tissue will stretch and cause you severe back pain. And your old boxers, they won't fit your hips, and there's too much loose fabric now. It'll just bunch up and hurt you. I looked at the delicate undergarments in her hands. The rational part of my brain wanted to scream, to throw them across the room and demand my old life back. But my chest was currently aching with a dull, throbbing heaviness just from the gravity of sitting upright. The oversized sweatpants I was wearing were slipping down my drastically narrowed waist, pulling uncomfortably around my widened thighs. "I'll give you some privacy," my mom whispered, placing the bra and panties gently on my lap. She stood up, kissed the top of my head, and walked out of the room, closing the door behind her. I sat there in the quiet hum of my old room, staring at the women's underwear resting on my thighs. Slowly, with trembling hands, I stripped off the hospital sweatshirt and sweatpants. I stood naked in the center of the room, shivering slightly as the cool air hit my smooth, hairless skin. I caught a glimpse of myself in the full-length mirror attached to the back of my door. The hourglass figure looking back at me was an undeniable reality. There was nothing masculine left to salvage. I picked up the white cotton panties first. I stepped one foot in, then the other, pulling the soft, stretchy fabric up my legs as I pulled them over my thick thighs. The elastic waistband snapped gently against my skin, settling perfectly into the dip of my waist, sitting high on my newly flared hips. I let out a shaky breath. It felt correct. There was no excess, baggy fabric in the front like my old boxers. The cotton hugged my soft curves, keeping everything secure and contained. The physical comfort was immediate, silencing the mental protest that screamed I shouldn't be wearing women's underwear. Next was the sports bra. I picked up the gray fabric, stretching the band with my hands. I took a deep breath, raised my arms, and pulled it over my head. I shimmied the fabric down over my shoulders, wincing slightly, as it brushed against my hypersensitive nipples, but as I pulled the elastic band down, so it snapped snugly against my rib cage, right beneath my breasts. A profound, undeniable wave of physical relief washed over me. The heavy aching pull of gravity on my chest vanished instantly. The soft, seamless fabric cradled my new breasts, pressing them gently but firmly against my chest wall. The constant, agonizing friction of loose fabric rubbing against my nipples was gone, replaced by a secure, comforting embrace. I let out a long, shuddering sigh, my shoulders dropping as the physical pain melted away. I walked over to the closet and reached for the clothes. My mom had laid out on the lower shelf a pair of black, high-waisted leggings and a blush pink fitted t-shirt sitting on the edge of the bed. I pulled the leggings on. They were a completely alien sensation. The tight, stretchy spandex gripped my calves, sliding smoothly up over my knees and expanding to accommodate the thick, plush fat of my thighs. As I stood up and pulled the waistband high over my stomach, right up to my belly button, the compression felt incredible. It smoothed out my lower half, aggressively emphasizing the stark contrast between my tiny waist and my wide, feminine hips. I grabbed the pastel pink t-shirt and slipped it on over the sports bra. The soft cotton draped beautifully, clinging slightly to the curve of my supported breasts, and falling cleanly over the black leggings. I turned slowly to face the full-length mirror. My breath caught in my throat. The person in the mirror wasn't a boy playing dress-up. It wasn't a man forced into a humiliating costume. The clothes fit perfectly. The seam of the t-shirt sat flawlessly on my narrowed shoulders. The leggings traced a distinctly female lower body, the gap between my thighs completely erased by the soft curves pressing together. The sports bra gave my chest a smooth, natural, undeniable prominence. I wrapped my arms around my waist, my slender fingers tracing the dip of my silhouette. I was trying to find a reason to hate it, a reason to rip the clothes off, and demand my old self back. But the truth was a quiet, terrifying whisper in the back of my mind. I had never been this physically comfortable in my entire life. The heavy, awkward clumsiness I had felt as a teenage boy was gone. The male clothes that had always felt a little too stiff, a little too rough, were a thing of the past. These clothes, this soft, supportive fabric, felt like they were made specifically for the biology I had been hiding all my life. The resistance inside me didn't break with a dramatic explosion. It simply bled out.
leaving behind a strange, terrifying sense of peace. The door clicked open softly. My mom stepped back into the room, pausing near the doorway. She looked at me standing in front of the mirror, dressed in the leggings and the pink shirt. Her eyes filled with tears, but she smiled a genuine, warm smile. She walked up behind me, placing her hands gently on my shoulders. I looked at our reflection. We looked like mother and daughter. The resemblance, now that the testosterone was gone from my face, was striking. "They fit you perfectly," she whispered, squeezing my shoulders. "They feel right," I admitted, my light voice trembling. It was the hardest confession I had ever made. "It doesn't hurt anymore." "I know, baby," she said softly, resting her cheek against my hair. "I know this is terrifying. I know you've lost so much, but we have to look forward now. You can't live as a ghost." I looked down at my hands, the delicate fingers resting against the black spandex of my leggings. "I don't know who I am anymore. I'm not him, but I don't know how to be this." My mom turned me around so I was facing her. She reached up, gently tucking a stray lock of my long, dark hair behind my ear. "You're still my child," she said fiercely, her voice thick with emotion. "Your soul is the same, but the doctor said your legal identity, your records, everything has to be updated to match your biology. I've been thinking about it for 3 months. I didn't want to force anything on you, but I wanted you to have something beautiful to wake up to." She took a deep breath, her eyes searching mine. "Rosalie," she said softly. "Rosalie Taylor. I always loved that name. Rosalie." The name hung in the air between us. It was soft, elegant, and entirely female. I let it roll around in my mind. I looked back at the mirror, at the girl with the wide, terrified blue eyes, the soft pink lips, the full hips, and the gentle curves. Roland was dead. He died on that highway 3 months ago. I took a shaky breath, feeling the sports bra expand against my ribs, feeling the comfortable squeeze of the leggings on my thighs. I nodded slowly. "Rosalie," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. My mom pulled me into a tight, desperate hug. I wrapped my arms around her, burying my face in her shoulder. As I stood there in my childhood bedroom, wearing a bra and panties, held by my mother, I realized that the fight was over. I was Rosalie now. And the most terrifying part was that I was ready to meet her. I spent the first week as Rosalie completely barricaded inside my house. It was a self-imposed quarantine, a period of mourning and frantic biological adjustment. I was a ghost haunting the hallways, learning how to exist in a body. That felt like a beautifully tailored, yet terrifyingly unfamiliar spacesuit. I learned how to sleep on my side without crushing my newly tender chest. I learned how to navigate the stairs without my widened hips clipping the banister. But staying inside was making me claustrophobic. The walls were closing in. Thick, with the suffocating reality of my situation. I needed air. I needed to know if I would shatter the moment the afternoon sun touched my skin. I needed to step outside, just for a walk around the quiet suburban block, to prove to myself that I could exist in the real world. I stood before my open closet. The oversized sweatpants I had been practically living in suddenly felt inadequate. If I was going to step outside, I couldn't look like a sick patient hiding in loungewear. I needed an outfit, a real one. My eyes bypassed the few pairs of women's jeans my mom had bought. The thought of thick denim still made me nervous and landed on a combination hanging neatly near the center. A baby pink rib-knit V-neck top and a gray pleat tennis skirt. It was undeniably, aggressively feminine. A week ago, the mere thought of wearing it would have induced a panic attack. Today, staring at the soft fabrics, I just felt a strange, fluttering knot of nervous anticipation in my stomach. I stripped off my pajamas, the cool air of the bedroom raising goosebumps across my smooth arms. I slipped into my white cotton panties and my gray sports bra. The routine of it was already becoming an anchor. The bra snapped securely around my ribcage, instantly taking the agonizing weight off my chest and pressing my breasts into a comfortable, supported shape. I reached for the pink rib top. Taking a deep breath, I pulled it over my head. The tactile sensation was entirely new. The rib-knit material was incredibly stretchy, yet designed to cling. As I pulled it down, the fabric caught on the swell of my sports bra.
stretching tightly across my chest before snapping inward aggressively to hug my drastically narrowed waist. The V-neck dipped just low enough to hint at the newly formed cleavage pressed together by the bra. It wasn't tight in a suffocating way. It was secure, holding me like a second skin, completely outlining the new, undeniable curves of my upper body. Next was the skirt. I unzipped the side and stepped into the circle of gray fabric. Pulling it up was a stark reminder of my altered skeleton. The waistband was tiny, designed for my new waist, but to get it there, I had to pull it over the thick, plush fat of my thighs and the wide, flared bone structure of my pelvis. I wiggled it up, feeling the fabric stretch to its absolute limit over my hips, before finally clearing them and settling snugly around my high waist, right over my belly button. I reached down and pulled the zipper up. It glided shut, cinching the skirt perfectly against my midriff. I let go, and the pleats fell into place. They flared out gently. An architectural miracle of clothing design that graciously concealed the sudden width of my hips, while simultaneously emphasizing the dramatic plunge of my waistline. I grabbed a pair of white, high-rise cotton socks, pulling them up snugly over my calves, and slipped my feet into a pair of classic, pristine white sneakers. I stood in front of the full-length mirror, my breath hitched. The silhouette was striking. The tight pink top and the flared gray skirt cut a perfect, classic hourglass shape. But something was missing. The long, raven black hair falling messily over my shoulders looked chaotic against the neatness of the outfit. Acting on an instinct I didn't know I possessed, I grabbed a black hair tie from my nightstand. I gathered the heavy weight of my hair, pulling it back from my face, smoothing the strands up high on the crown of my head, and wrapping the elastic around it thrice. The high ponytail swung against the nape of my neck, light and bouncy. I looked at my face. The estrogen had softened every angle, but my eyes looked pale. Sitting on the vanity was a tube of mascara my mom had left just in case. My hands shook slightly as I unscrewed the cap. I leaned into the mirror, mimicking what I had seen girls do 1,000 times on television, and carefully brushed the wand through my lashes. The transformation was instantaneous. The black pigment lengthened my lashes, making my doe-like blue eyes look enormous, deep, and startlingly pretty. I grabbed my keys, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and walked downstairs. Opening the front door felt like opening an airlock into outer space. The late afternoon sun was beginning its descent, casting long, golden shadows across the empty suburban street. I stepped onto the concrete porch. The very first sensation was a physical shock: the breeze. The cool autumn air bit directly into the exposed skin of my mid-thighs. As a guy, my shorts had always ended at or below the knee. This pleated skirt stopped several inches higher. Every subtle gust of wind swirled up under the hem, kissing my bare skin, and sending a shiver of intense vulnerability straight up my spine. It was an incredibly exposed, naked feeling, yet simultaneously thrilling in its freedom. I took a step down the porch stairs and then another, my white sneakers hitting the sidewalk. Walking mechanics had entirely changed because my pelvis was wider. My femurs angled inward toward my knees. To keep my balance, my body naturally shifted its weight from side to side. My hips swayed. It wasn't a conscious, exaggerated strut. It was just the only biological way I could walk smoothly now. And with every step, the gray pleated skirt reacted. The heavy fabric swished and brushed rhythmically against the backs of my thighs. Swish, swish, swish. It was a hypnotic, kinetic sensation. The skirt moved like liquid around my hips. A constant physical reminder of the feminine space I was occupying in the world. I walked for 2 blocks, my high ponytail swinging side to side with the cadence of my steps. Nobody was outside. No cars passed. It was just me, the wind, and the quiet rustle of my clothes. I realized I was holding my breath, my shoulders tensed, waiting for someone to jump out and scream, "Imposter!" But nothing happened. The world didn't end. The sun kept shining. I reached the small neighborhood park at the end of the street. Underneath a large oak tree sat a green wooden bench. My legs, still lacking their former stamina due to muscle atrophy, felt a bit shaky. I walked over to the bench and prepared to sit down. As I bent my knees, the hem of the short tennis skirt rode up further. Before my conscious brain could even register the exposure, an entirely new, deeply ingrained reflex hijacked my nervous system. Without thinking, my hands shot down to the back of my skirt, smoothing the pleats flat against my thighs so they wouldn't wrinkle. The moment my bottom touched the wood, my knees snapped tightly together. I froze, looking down at my lap. My legs were pressed flush against each other, angled slightly to the side in a picture-perfect, demure posture. I hadn't forced it. I hadn't meticulously planned how a girl should sit. The moment I felt the vulnerable exposure of the skirt riding on, my body automatically executed the biological and social imperative to protect my modesty. It was a terrifyingly natural instinct. I was learning the silent, unwritten language of being a woman, and my body was a remarkably fast learner. I slowly leaned back against the bench. Across the paved path stood a large, dark glass display case for community notices. The glass acted as a perfect shaded mirror. I stared at the reflection. I saw the sleek high ponytail. I saw the baby pink top stretching over a full chest and dipping into a tiny waist. I saw the gray pleats splayed neatly over plush hips, the smooth, bare thighs pressed tightly together, and the pristine white socks and sneakers. I searched the reflection for Roland. I looked for the awkward boy who used to slump his shoulders and hide in hoodies. I looked for any trace of the masculine panic that had consumed me in the hospital room. He wasn't there. He was entirely, irreversibly gone. Sitting on that bench, feeling the cool breeze on my legs and the comfortable support of my bra, the thick, choking fog of fear finally began to break. I wasn't a boy in a costume. I wasn't a medical anomaly trying to survive a nightmare. I looked at the girl in the glass. She looked young, fresh, and undeniably beautiful. For the first time since I woke up from the coma, a small tentative smile touched my pink lips. The terror of what I had lost was slowly, quietly, being eclipsed by a profound, intoxicating curiosity about who Rosalie was going to be. The safety of my house had been a cocoon, a quiet place where I could negotiate the terms of my surrender to this new body. But Monday morning arrived with the suffocating gravity of an execution date. I had to go back to the university. I had to take Rosalie out of the suburban vacuum and drop her into the snake pit. I stood in front of my closet, panic rising in my throat like bile. The pink rib top and tennis skirt from my neighborhood walk were entirely too playful, too vulnerable for the campus gauntlet. I needed armor. But I also knew, with a terrifying certainty, that trying to hide in baggy, unisex clothes would only make me look like a freak. If I walked in there trying to be an effeminate Roland, they would tear me apart. I had to walk in undeniably, unequivocally as a woman. I had to own the biology that had hijacked me. My hands, trembling slightly, reached past the casual wear and settled on a hanger, holding a dress my mother had bought from a boutique downtown. It was an emerald green wrap dress, made of a heavy, fluid jersey knit. It was elegant, modest in its length, but uncompromising in its shape. I stripped down to my white panties and gray sports bra, shivering in the morning air, and took the dress off the hanger. Slipping it on was a deliberate, tactile ritual. I guided my arms into the long, slim-fitting sleeves. The cool, silky jersey material slid effortlessly over my smooth, hairless forearms, clinging tightly to my wrists. Then came the wrap. I pulled the left panel of the dress across my torso, feeling the heavy fabric drape snugly over my supported breasts. I threaded the long fabric tie through the small slit at the side of my waist, then pulled the right panel over the left, crossing them in a deep V right between my breasts. I grabbed both ends of the fabric belt, took a deep breath to empty my lungs, and pulled them tight around my midsection. The physical sensation was an immediate, visceral jolt. The wrap dress didn't just sit on my body, it sculpted me. As I tied the knot securely at my left hip, the compression cinched my already narrow waist inward, which had the immediate effect of making my wide hips pop out with dramatic, undeniable flair. I looked up into the full-length mirror, my breath catching on a soft gasp. The emerald green was a stark, beautiful contrast to my pale skin and dark hair. The V-neck was a masterpiece of feminine design. It plunged just deep enough to expose the delicate, fragile lines of my collarbones and the very top swell of my cleavage, but no further. It was classy, yet deeply sensual, but the most mesmerizing part was how the fabric reacted to my breathing.
Every time I inhaled, the heavy jersey knit stretched tight across the soft, heavy mounds of my breasts, rising and falling in a rhythmic, undeniably female cadence. I paired the dress with sheer black tights and a pair of low-heeled black ankle boots. I couldn't handle stilettos yet, but the 2-inch chunky heel was enough to force my posture upright, pushing my chest out and tilting my pelvis back. I applied mascara, a touch of pale pink lip gloss, and grabbed a black leather tote bag. Roland was a phantom, Rosalie was real, and she was terrified. The drive to campus was a blur. The walk from the parking lot to the main humanities building was the longest march of my life. Every step in the heeled boots required my hips to sway, a pendulum motion that caused the hem of the emerald dress to swirl elegantly around my calves. The moment I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the main hall, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't my imagination. It was instantaneous. Conversations died. Heads turned. The ambient noise of scraping chairs and slammed lockers dropped by half, replaced by the distinct buzzing hiss of whispers. I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, clutching the straps of my tote bag so hard my knuckles turned white. My heart hammered against my ribs, making the green fabric over my chest flutter rapidly. I felt stripped naked by their stares. I could feel the boys' eyes tracking the sway of my hips and the curve of my waist. I could feel the girls' eyes scanning my hair, my makeup, the fit of my dress. They knew. The rumors of the coma and the medical malpractice had undoubtedly circulated. But hearing about a freak hormonal accident was one thing. Seeing a beautiful, fully formed woman walking in the shoes of a dead boy was another. Well, look what the coma dragged in. The voice cut through the whispers like a serrated knife. I froze, my heeled boots clicking to a dead halt on the linoleum. Leaning against a row of lockers, blocking my path to the lecture hall, was Jack. He was a linebacker for the university team, a guy who had always treated Roland with a baseline of dismissive, masculine cruelty. Now, looking at me, his eyes weren't dismissive, they were hungry, mocking, and entirely predatory. He pushed himself off the lockers and stepped into my personal space, looking me up and down with slow, deliberate disrespect. His gaze lingered on my chest. "I heard they pumped you full of estrogen, man," Jack sneered, lowering his voice so only the crowd immediately around us could hear. "But damn, I didn't think you'd come back looking like a premium piece of meat." "Nice tits. Roland, you stuffed that bra, or did the hospital grow those for you?" The sheer vulgarity of it hit me like a physical blow. The phantom masculinity I thought might still reside somewhere in my brain offered absolutely no defense. I didn't feel the urge to punch him. I didn't puff out my chest. Instead, my new biology reacted with a pure, unadulterated female panic. I shrank into myself, my shoulders curled forward to protect my chest, my knees knocking together. "Stop it! Leave me alone!" I stammered, my voice sounding breathy, high, and pathetic. I tried to take a step back, desperate to escape his looming presence. But my weight shifted awkwardly on the unfamiliar 2-inch heels. My ankle rolled. I gasped as the ground tilted, my arms flailing as I began to fall backward. I never hit the floor. A large, incredibly strong arm wrapped around my waist from behind, arresting my fall instantly. I was hauled backward, my spine pressing flush against a broad, hard, muscular chest. "Back the fuck off, Jack," a deep, rumbling voice growled over my head. I looked up, my vision spinning. It was Tyler. Tyler had been Roland's best friend since freshman year. We had played video games until 3 a.m., drank cheap beer, and complained about exams. He was a towering guy, quiet but imposing, and fiercely loyal. But as he held me up, glaring daggers at Jack, he wasn't looking at me like a bro. Jack took a step back, holding his hands up in mock surrender. Tyler's reputation commanded respect, even from the football team. "Just catching up with an old friend. Ty, chill out." Jack shot me one last, lingering smirk before turning and disappearing into the crowd. The hallway went dead silent. I was still pinned against Tyler. My breath was coming in short, ragged gasps. I slowly found my footing, placing my boots flat on the floor. But Tyler didn't let go immediately. His hand was clamped firmly around my waist. The sensory feedback was explosive. Through the thin, cool jersey fabric of the emerald-wrapped dress, I could feel the searing heat of his palm. His fingers were splayed across my stomach, easily spanning the tiny width of my cinched waist. His thumb rested just above my hip bone. It was the first time a man had touched my new body. A violent electric current shot through my nervous system, originating from the spot where his hand burned against my waist. The heat spread downward, pooling heavily in my lower stomach, making my breath hitch. I looked down at his large, tanned hand resting against the elegant green fabric that wrapped around my feminine curves. The contrast in size, in strength, in pure biological presence was overwhelming. He wasn't touching Roland. You don't grab a male friend by the waist and hold them against your chest. He was holding a girl. He was holding me. And God help me. I melted into it. For a split second, I didn't want him to let go. My body, flooded with estrogen and hardwired with new instincts, responded to his masculine strength with absolute, terrifying submission. I felt small, protected, and acutely, devastatingly aware of my own femininity. My heart fluttered in my chest like a trapped bird. "Hey," Tyler said softly, his deep voice vibrating against my back. He slowly loosened his grip, stepping to the side so he could look at my face. He kept one hand gently on my elbow to make sure I was steady. His eyes, dark brown and usually full of sarcastic humor, were wide and intensely focused. As they swept over my face, my makeup, the V-neck of my dress, before snapping back to my eyes, a faint flush crept up his neck. Are you okay?" he asked, his voice losing its tough edge, replaced by a gentle, careful hesitation. I'm fine," I whispered, clutching my tote bag to my chest, my cheeks burning with a blush so hot I felt like I was running a fever. "Thank you, Tyler." He swallowed hard, his eyes lingering on my pink lips for a fraction of a second too long. "You shouldn't have to deal with garbage like him," he muttered. He took a half step back, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. You look really different. You look—" He struggled for the word, clearly terrified of crossing a line. "I know," I said softly, looking down at my heeled boots. "Come on," Tyler said, clearing his throat and gesturing down the hall. "I'll walk you to class. Make sure nobody else bothers you." As I walked beside him, the emerald dress swishing against my legs, I felt the phantom heat of his hand still burning on my waist. The old dynamic was shattered into a million pieces. The ghost of Roland was finally, truly exorcised, replaced by the terrifying realization that my old best friend was now looking at me, protecting me, and treating me exactly like what I had become. A woman. The incident with Jack and Tyler in the hallway established a new, undeniable reality. I was fragile. I was a target, and for reasons I was still struggling to process. My body fundamentally craved the protection that came with this new vulnerability. The remainder of that first week was an exercise in hypervigilance, navigating the campus as an entirely new entity. But there was one hurdle I couldn't avoid with clever routing or Tyler's looming presence. Physical education, it was a mandatory credit, and dropping it would delay my graduation. I stood in the girls' locker room, the metallic clang of lockers shutting echoing off the tiled walls. I had spoken to the university administration, presenting the mountain of medical documentation regarding my chromosomal makeup and the hormonal restructuring. My legal name and gender marker had been officially changed to Rosalie Taylor. Female, consequently, I was placed in the women's section for PE. The air in the locker room smelled of floral deodorant, hairspray, and sweat. It was an intimidating, entirely alien ecosystem. I kept my head down, my dark hair falling forward as a shield, as I quickly stripped off my jeans and sweater. I pulled my gym clothes out of my duffel bag. The university had strict uniform policies for indoor sports. My mom had helped me buy the required gear, making sure it accommodated my new body. I pulled on a pair of black, high-waisted spandex volleyball shorts. They were terrifyingly short, ending just below the curve of my bottom. As I pulled them up, the thick compression fabric aggressively gripped my thighs, smoothing out the plush fat and lifting my backside. The waistband sat high, violently cinching my waist and once again making my wide hips the absolute focal point of my lower half. Next was the sports bra. This wasn't the soft, seamless lounge bra I wore at home. This was a high-impact, heavily constructed piece of athletic wear. It had molded cups, thick crossback straps, and a wide band, I pulled it over my head and wriggled my arms through the straps. The moment I hooked the clasp, my chest was locked down. The bra shoved my breasts aggressively together and upward, creating a stark, deep cleavage, before compressing them firmly against my ribcage to prevent any painful bouncing during activity. Over the bra, I slipped on a tight, cropped white athletic tank top. The hem ended an inch above my belly button, leaving a sliver of pale, smooth skin exposed above the black waistband of the shorts. I looked at myself in the locker room mirror. I looked exactly like every other athletic girl in the room. The spandex shorts outlined the undeniable, thick curve of my thighs. The cropped tank clung tightly to the dramatic plunge of my waist and the heavy, supported swell of my chest. "Hey, you're Rosalie, right?" I jumped, turning around quickly. A girl with blonde hair pulled into a messy bun was smiling brightly at me. She was wearing the exact same uniform. I recognized her from a few of my humanities lectures. Her name was Alyssa. "Yeah, that's me," I said, my voice soft, instinctively adopting a higher, gentler pitch. "I'm Alyssa. Coach assigned you to my team for the volleyball module today," she said, leaning against the lockers casually. She didn't look at me with pity or morbid curiosity. She just looked at me like a teammate. "Have you played much before?" Not recently," I admitted, "not as a girl. Anyway, don't worry about it," she laughed, clapping me lightly on the shoulder. "Just keep your knees bent and stay low. You'll be fine." We walked out into the massive gymnasium together. The harsh squeak of sneakers on the polished hardwood floor echoed loudly. The class was split into 4 courts. Alyssa led me to our designated area, where 4 other girls were already stretching. "All right, ladies." Coach Miller, a stocky woman with a whistle around her neck, barked across the gym. 6 on 6, first to 15, let's go." I took my position in the back right corner, feeling horribly exposed. The cool air of the gym bit at my bare thighs and midriff. I bounced lightly on my toes, trying to shake the nerves. The whistle blew. A girl on the opposing team served the ball. It sailed over the net, high and fast, heading straight for my corner. Old instincts flared, Roland's instincts. I stood up straight, planning to step back and bump the ball with stiff arms. But my body refused the command. As I moved, the physics of my own anatomy betrayed me. My new lower center of gravity made standing tall and moving backward feel incredibly unstable. My widened pelvis shifted awkwardly, and my thick thighs, compressed tightly by the spandex shorts, threw off my stride. Instead of stepping back cleanly, I stumbled, but as I fell, a new, entirely female instinct took over. Because my center of mass was now situated entirely in my hips and thighs. Dropping low felt incredibly secure. I bent my knees deeply, my hips sinking toward the floor. I spread my feet wide, the spandex stretching taut across my thighs as I dropped into a perfect deep squat. The ball plummeted toward me. Because I was so low, I didn't have to reach awkwardly. I brought my arms together, creating a flat platform, and bumped the ball cleanly up into the air toward the setter. "Perfect pass, Rose," Lissa yelled from the front row. I stood back up, my chest heaving against the tight sports bra. I stared at my hands. It was a revelation. I hadn't just survived the play. I had executed it better than I ever could have as a guy. My new body wasn't just a costume or a burden. It was a highly functional, entirely different biomechanical machine. The lower center of gravity, the wider hips, the thicker thighs, they made me incredibly stable when I stayed low to the ground. The game continued. With every point, my confidence grew. I stopped fighting the body I was in and started using it. When I needed to dive for a low ball, the padding of fat on my hips and thighs absorbed the impact smoothly against the hardwood. When I needed to pivot, the flexibility in my newly loosened pelvic ligaments allowed me to change direction with a fluid, graceful sway that felt entirely natural. The score was 14-14. Match point, the opposing team set up a spike. A tall girl leaped into the air and slammed the ball down hard, aiming for the gap between me and Alyssa. I didn't think, I reacted. I lunged to my left, my heavy thighs propelling me forward. I dropped to my knees, sliding across the polished floor, my arms outstretched. The ball hit my forearms with a loud smack, popping high up into the air just before it touched the ground. Alyssa was there. She jumped and spiked it viciously over the net, directly onto the opposing team's floor. The whistle blew, Game over. I was still kneeling on the floor, panting hard. Sweat beaded on my forehead, rolling down my neck to pool in the cleavage created by my sports bra. My white crop tank was damp, clinging translucent against the gray material of the bra beneath it. My bare thighs burned from the friction of the slide, but my heart was pounding with an exhilarating, triumphant rhythm.
Yes, Alyssa ran over to me, her face flushed with excitement.
Before I could stand up, she dropped to her knees beside me, threw her arms around my neck, and hugged me tight.
That save was insane, she screamed in my ear, squeezing me.
The contact was electric, but not in the terrifying, submissive way Tyler's touch had been. This was different. Alyssa's body was soft, her chest pressing against mine, her skin slick with sweat. She smelled like exertion and vanilla body spray. It was a purely platonic, intensely physical celebration between teammates, between girls. The other girls on our team rushed over, collapsing onto the floor around us in a sweaty, laughing pile. Hands patted my shoulders. Someone ruffled my ponytail.
Seriously, Rosalie, where did you learn to dig like that? Another girl asked, tossing me a towel.
I caught the towel, wiping the sweat from my face. I looked around the circle of smiling, flushed faces. They weren't looking at me like a medical experiment. They weren't staring at my chest or whispering about my past. They were looking at me as one of their own, for the first time in my life. I felt the unique, warm solidarity of female friendship. It was a tactile, emotionally open connection that I had never experienced in the rigid, emotionally stunted world of male camaraderie.
I don't know, I laughed, the sound bubbling up from my chest, light and genuinely happy.
I guess I just have a really low center of gravity now. They laughed with me. As we walked back to the locker room, Alyssa linked her arm through mine. Our hips bumped together as we walked, a casual, intimate gesture that felt entirely right. I peeled off my sweaty sports bra in the locker room, no longer trying to hide behind my hair. I walked to the showers alongside the other girls, the hot water washing away the sweat and the lingering shadows of Roland's ghost. I wasn't an imposter playing a role. I was Rosalie, and sitting on that gym floor, surrounded by my teammates. Feeling the strength and grace of my new body, I realized I belonged there.
The university's annual winter gala was the kind of event Roland would have actively mocked. It was an excuse for the fraternities to flex their wealth and for the sororities to turn the campus into a high-stakes fashion runway.
I used to spend gala night in my dorm, eating cheap pizza and grinding ranks in online multiplayer games with Tyler. But this year was different. The week before the gala, Tyler and I were sitting in the campus coffee shop. We had fallen into a comfortable, albeit slightly charged, routine. He was fiercely protective, walking me between classes and glaring down anyone who stared too long. I, in turn, had grown acutely, dangerously aware of his presence. Every time he brushed past me, every time his deep voice vibrated near my ear, a hot, heavy pulse settled in my lower stomach. The estrogen had completely rewired my attraction, aligning it ruthlessly with my new biology. I didn't just feel safe around Tyler. I felt a deep biological yearning to be held by him. "So," Tyler said, stirring his black coffee, not looking at me, "the gala is on Friday." "I know," I said softly, tracing the rim of my latte cup. I was wearing a soft, oversized cream sweater that slipped off one shoulder, exposing the thin strap of my bra. It was a calculated choice, a subtle test of my own femininity. "You going?" he asked, finally looking up. His dark eyes caught mine, intense and unreadable. My heart did a painful little flip. I wasn't planning on it. I don't really have anyone to go with. Tyler cleared his throat, shifting his large frame awkwardly in the small cafe chair. "Well, I was thinking maybe we could go together." He didn't say as friends. The omission hung heavily in the air between us. I stared at him, my breath catching in my throat. This was the precipice. Saying yes meant stepping off the edge, officially acknowledging the tectonic shift in our dynamic. It meant declaring to the entire campus that Roland was dead and Rosalie was Tyler's date. "I'd like that," I whispered, a slow, tentative smile spreading across my lips. Tyler let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a week. A genuine, boyish grin broke across his usually stoic face. "Awesome. I'll pick you up at 7. That Friday afternoon, my childhood bedroom was transformed into a chaotic staging ground.
My mom, acting with the frantic, joyful energy of a military commander planning a bloodless coup,
had laid out an array of makeup, hair tools, and accessories across my desk. But the most important element was hanging on the closet door. I stood before it, wearing only my white cotton panties and a strapless, heavily padded push-up bra my mom had insisted I buy.
"If you're going to wear a gown, you need the right foundation, Rosalie," she had said, entirely unfazed by the surreal nature of discussing cleavage with her formerly male child.
The dress was a masterpiece. It wasn't the emerald green wrap dress from my first day back. This was formal wear. It was a floor-length, deep sapphire blue gown made of heavy, liquid silk.
The bodice was a corset, heavily boned and structured, designed to brutally manipulate the torso.
"All right, let's get you into this," my mom said, holding the dress open. I stepped into the pool of blue silk, pulling the heavy fabric up my legs. The silk slid over my smooth thighs and settled around my hips. My mom stood behind me, gripping the edges of the corset back. "Take a deep breath and hold it," she commanded. I inhaled sharply, my chest expanding against the push-up bra. My mom began pulling the laces. The physical sensation was intense, entirely foreign, and incredibly defining. The stiff boning of the corset dug into my ribs, forcefully compressing my already narrow waist. I let out a squeak as she pulled tighter, the laces dragging the edges of the corset together. As my waist was crushed inward, the laws of physics demanded the displaced mass go somewhere. The heavy silk material was forced tightly over the dramatic flare of my hips, exaggerating their width until I looked like a vintage pin-up illustration. Simultaneously, the top edge of the corset shoved aggressively upward against the underwire of my push-up bra. My breasts, already full, forced high onto my chest, spilling over the straight neckline of the gown in a display of undeniable, deep cleavage. "Okay, breathe," my mom said, tying the final knot at the small of my back. I exhaled slowly, feeling the rigid structure of the dress supporting me. I couldn't slouch even if I wanted to. The corset forced my spine straight, pushing my chest out and my shoulders back. It was a posture of pure, unapologetic femininity. I turned to the mirror. The breath left my lungs in a silent rush. I didn't recognize the woman in the glass. The sapphire silk clung to every curve, highlighting the stark, dramatic hourglass figure the corset had sculpted. My waist looked impossibly small, a tiny anchor point between the flare of my hips and the heavy, lifted swell of my chest. My mom spun me around and sat me down at the vanity. For the next hour, she worked her magic. She pinned my dark hair up into an elegant, messy chignon, leaving a few curled tendrils framing my face. She applied a smoky eyeshadow that made my blue eyes look startlingly bright, and finished with a swipe of deep crimson lipstick. When I finally stood up and slipped my feet into a pair of delicate, strappy silver heels, the transformation was complete. "Oh, Rosalie," my mom whispered, her hands flying to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes. You are breathtaking." I looked in the mirror one last time. The fear was gone. The lingering ghost of Roland, the boy who used to hide in baggy clothes, had been entirely consumed by the glamorous, striking woman staring back at me. The doorbell rang. My stomach plummeted. The adrenaline hit my system like a physical blow. I picked up my small silver clutch and walked slowly out of my bedroom, the heavy silk of the gown swishing loudly against my legs with every step. I reached the top of the stairs. My dad was standing in the foyer, looking up at me. He had been quiet since I woke up, struggling silently to reconcile the loss of his son with the presence of his daughter. But as I stood at the top of the stairs, bathed in the warm light of the hallway, his jaw dropped. He didn't see a tragedy. He didn't see a medical error. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," he said. His voice thick with emotion, he reached out his hand to help me down the last few steps. I took his hand, managing a small, trembling smile. "Thanks, Dad." I turned toward the front door. Tyler was standing in the entryway, wearing a sharp, tailored black suit. He was talking to my mom, but as the rustle of my silk gown reached his ears, he stopped mid-sentence and turned around. Time seemed to freeze. Tyler's eyes widened. He looked me up and down, his gaze traveling from the delicate silver heels up the smooth drape of the blue silk over my hips, pausing heavily on the dramatic, corseted plunge of my waist and the pale swell of my cleavage, before finally meeting my eyes. He looked entirely, helplessly stunned. "Wow," he breathed. Taking a step toward me, he looked like he had forgotten how to breathe. "Rosalie, you look incredible." The heat in his eyes sent a flush of pure, intoxicating power straight to my head. This wasn't the protective gaze of a friend. This was the raw, unmasked desire of a man looking at a woman he found desperately attractive. "Thank you," I murmured, my voice dropping to a soft, husky pitch. I stepped closer to him, the silk of my dress brushing against the wool of his suit trousers. "Ready to go?" he asked, his voice rougher than usual. He offered me his arm. I slipped my hand into the crook of his elbow, feeling the hard, solid muscle beneath his suit jacket. Ready. The gala was held in the university's grand ballroom. The moment we walked through the double doors, the ambient chatter dipped. Heads turned. I felt the familiar weight of their stares, but tonight the panic was gone. I wasn't an anomaly to be mocked. I was Tyler's date, and I knew exactly how I looked. I walked beside him, my posture perfect, the heels forcing a confident, swaying strut that made the blue silk ripple like water. Girls who used to ignore Roland completely now stared at my dress with open, envious admiration. Guys who used to shove past me in the hallways now scrambled to get out of Tyler's way, their eyes lingering hungrily on my waist and chest. Tyler kept his hand firmly on the small of my back the entire night. The heat of his palm through the silk was a constant, grounding presence. Every time another guy looked at me a little too long, Tyler's hand would tense, pulling me fractionally closer to his side. The possessiveness of the gesture thrilled me to my core. Later in the evening, the live band slowed their tempo, transitioning into a soft, romantic ballad. The lights dimmed, casting a warm golden glow over the dance floor. Tyler turned to me, his dark eyes intense. "Dance with me." I nodded, unable to speak around the sudden knot in my throat. He led me onto the crowded floor. He turned to face me, placing one large hand firmly on my corseted waist and taking my hand in his other. I stepped into his personal space, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against the stiff boning of my dress. I reached up, resting my free hand gently on his broad shoulder. As we began to sway to the music, Tyler pulled me closer. The physical contact was overwhelming. My soft, corseted torso pressed flush against the hard, unyielding muscle of his chest. My breasts, pushed high by the dress, yielded softly against his suit jacket. Because I was shorter now, my face rested perfectly against his chest, right over his heart. I could hear it beating fast and heavy. I closed my eyes, letting the music and the scent of his cologne wash over me. I felt small, delicate, and entirely protected in his arms. "You're the most beautiful woman here tonight," Tyler murmured, his breath warm against my ear, sending a shiver down my spine. I pulled my head back slightly to look up at him. The dim lighting caught the sharp angles of his jaw and the intense, smoldering heat in his eyes. "Tyler," I whispered, the name slipping from my crimson lips like a prayer. He didn't hesitate. He lowered his head, closing the final few inches between us, and pressed his lips firmly against mine. The kiss shattered whatever fragile remnants of my past still clung to my soul. It was entirely demanding, deeply masculine, and incredibly hot. My body reacted instantly, melting against him, my hands sliding up to tangle in the hair at the nape of his neck. My lips parted, yielding entirely to his kiss, the estrogen in my system screaming in euphoric, biological triumph. When we finally broke apart, breathless and flushed, Tyler rested his forehead against mine. His hand tightened on my waist. I opened my eyes, looking at the man holding me. I looked down at my silk-clad body, feeling the heavy, undeniable truth of my own femininity pressing against him. The accident had killed Roland, but as Tyler held me on that dance floor, my heart soaring with a terrifying, beautiful joy, I finally understood the truth. It hadn't destroyed me. It had set me free. The winter gala marked the official, undeniable end of my transition. The morning after, I didn't wake up reaching for baggy sweatpants or feeling the phantom weight of my old life. I woke up, stretched beneath my floral duvet, and felt the familiar, reassuring tightness of my sports bra. I sat up, brushing my long dark hair out of my face, and smiled. I was Rosalie, and for the first time in my life, the person I saw in the mirror matched the person I felt inside. But existing as a woman wasn't just about the physical reality. It was about navigating the complex, often exhausting social reality. The gala had established me as a beautiful, desirable woman, but it had also painted a target on my back. Monday morning, I walked into my advanced literature seminar. I was wearing a soft, cream-colored cashmere turtleneck and a camel-colored, high-waisted wool pencil skirt. It was a sophisticated academic look, paired with sheer black tights and my 2-inch heeled boots. The skirt hugged my hips aggressively, and the tight cashmere left absolutely nothing to the imagination regarding the size and shape of my chest. I took my seat near the front, pulling my notebook from my tote bag. Nice outfit, Rose. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. Marcus, a guy who sat 2 rows behind me, had been increasingly attentive since the gala. He was the kind of guy who thought persistence was a substitute for charm. "Thanks, Marcus," I said politely, not turning around, focusing on my pen. "You know, you looked really incredible on Friday," he continued, leaning forward, his voice dropping an octave in a failed attempt at seduction. "I was hoping I could take you out sometime. Maybe grab a drink." The old Roland would have frozen, unsure how to handle the confrontation, but the old Roland didn't exist anymore. I turned slowly in my chair, crossing my legs tightly. The movement caused the slit at the back of my pencil skirt to part slightly, exposing a flash of sheer black nylon over my calf. I saw Marcus's eyes instantly dart downward before snapping back to my face. I offered him a sweet, perfectly practiced smile, the kind of smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I'm flattered." "Marcus? Really?" I said, my voice light, melodic, and entirely dismissive. "But I'm currently seeing someone. Tyler and I are pretty exclusive." Marcus's face fell, a mix of disappointment and genuine fear crossing his features at the mention of Tyler's name. "Oh, right, yeah, Tyler. Cool. No problem." He leaned back quickly, suddenly intensely interested in his textbook. I turned back to the front, my heart beating a steady, calm rhythm. I had handled it. I hadn't needed Tyler there to protect me. I had used the inherent social power of my femininity, a polite smile, and a firm boundary to shut him down completely. It was a subtle psychological weapon, and I was learning to wield it with devastating efficiency. Class ended, and I walked out into the bustling hallway. The stares were still there, but they no longer felt predatory. They felt admiring. I walked with my head held high, the click of my heeled boots echoing sharply against the linoleum. My hips swayed with a natural hypnotic rhythm, the camel wool of the pencil skirt shifting over my curves. I met Alyssa in the student union for lunch. "Oh my God, look at you," she squealed, grabbing my hands and spinning me around as I approached our table. "That skirt is amazing. Your butt looks incredible." I laughed, a bright, genuine sound, and swatted her arm playfully. "Stop it. You're embarrassing me." "I am not. You look like a hot professor." She grinned, sliding into the booth. "So, spill, how was the rest of the night with Tyler?" I slid into the booth opposite her, carefully smoothing the wool skirt flat against my thighs before crossing my legs. I felt a hot blush creep up my neck, my blue eyes dropping to the table. "It was really good." "Just good," she pressed, leaning forward, her eyes dancing with mischief. "I saw the way he was looking at you on the dance floor. Rose, he looked like he wanted to eat you alive." The blush intensified, burning my cheeks. I reached up, tucking a stray lock of hair behind my ear, my delicate fingers trembling slightly at the memory of Tyler's kiss. "He kissed me," I admitted softly. Alyssa gasped, slamming her hands on the table. "I knew it. Oh my God, I am so happy for you. He's totally obsessed." We spent the next hour dissecting every detail of the gala, from the dresses to the drama. It was effortless. The conversation flowed with a chaotic, emotionally open energy that I absolutely adored. We talked about clothes, about guys, about our classes. There was no posturing, no defensive masculinity to maintain. As we finished our salads, Alyssa looked at me thoughtfully. "You know, you've changed a lot in the last few weeks," she said softly, her smile fading into a look of genuine affection. I traced the condensation on my water glass. I know, it's been a lot.
Not just physically, she clarified.
When you first came back, you looked like a deer in headlights. You looked terrified of your own shadow. But now you're glowing. Rose, you look confident. You look like you belong in your own skin. I looked up at her, my blue eyes shimmering with unshed tears. I do, I whispered. For the first time in my life, I really do.
After lunch, I had a free period before my final lecture. I decided to walk back to my dorm room to drop off a few heavy textbooks.
I unlocked the door to the small single room I had requested after my transition. It was decorated in soft, warm colors, a far cry from the stark, messy dorm Roland used to inhabit.
I dropped my tote bag on the desk and kicked off my heeled boots, letting out a sigh of relief as my feet hit the soft rug.
I unzipped the camel pencil skirt, letting it fall to the floor, and pulled the cashmere sweater over my head. I stood in front of the full-length mirror attached to the closet door, wearing only my black lace bra and matching panties, a matching set Tyler had complimented the weekend before. I looked at my reflection. The physical changes were no longer shocking. They were my baseline. The wide, plush flare of my hips, the dramatic dip of my waist, the heavy, sensitive fullness of my breasts. I traced my hands over my soft stomach, feeling the slight dip of my navel. I ran my fingers over the smooth, flawless skin of my thighs. I wasn't a medical tragedy. I wasn't an experiment gone wrong. I walked over to the small jewelry box on my dresser. Inside lay a delicate silver necklace with a tiny, sparkling rose pendant. My mom had given it to me the day I legally changed my name. I picked it up, the cool metal slipping through my fingers. I stepped back to the mirror, reached behind my neck, and fastened the clasp. The silver rose rested perfectly in the hollow of my throat, sparkling against my pale skin. It was a small, purely decorative gesture, but it felt profound. It was a celebration of the femininity I had fought so hard to accept. I looked at the girl in the mirror. She was strong. She was beautiful. She was loved by her family, adored by her boyfriend, and accepted by her friends. She had survived a catastrophic trauma and emerged not broken, but remade. The accident had stolen Roland's life, erasing him entirely. It was a tragedy that would always leave a scar on my family. But as I stood there, wearing black lace and a silver rose, tracing the curve of my own breast, I couldn't bring myself to mourn him anymore. I smiled a slow, radiant, deeply female smile that lit up my entire face. I was Rosalie Taylor, and my life was just beginning.